Hello and welcome to the Daring and Doing podcast. I'm Will Hester and I'm joined by the brilliant Ben Bowman. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. I'm excited to get started. There's not enough Spurs podcasts, so we thought we'd start another one.
Yeah.
Get
It's
in there.
honestly, it's so surreal. I'm so excited to bring it to everyone and to start something. And thing is as well with you, I've heard your voice everywhere. Like your trajectory is going somewhere. And yeah, I feel like just getting used to hearing your voice. I'm gonna forget that it's my turn to talk. I'm gonna be listening, and then I'll be like, "Oh shit, it's my turn to talk." So,
Mate,
yeah,
I'm not sure if
looking forward to
that's a good
starting
or
with
a
you.
bad thing. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, just hearing my voice all the time. But
Yeah,
no,
nah,
thanks,
it's
mate.
good. It's good. It's quality, mate. It's quality.
Yeah, I appreciate it, mate. I'm
You're going
looking
to
forward to
the
getting started.
mate. Me too. Me too. You're going to the game tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, mate.
You a season ticket holder?
Yeah.
Oh, quality.
I used to be a season ticket. I've been going all my life, but I've been a member for ages, just bought tickets to all the games. And actually, the reason I got my season ticket is because Spurs started doing half season tickets this year, which is how a lot of people actually end
Okay.
up getting their first one. So I managed to get that. So my first game actually as an official season ticket holder was the Brighton game a few weeks ago. And I thought that was a great way to start. And then we played Wolves last week and then everything sort of went the other way. But I'm excited to get back. We was talking about this on another pod earlier, and it was like it feels like we've been away for ages. Like it feels like we haven't played in weeks.
Yeah.
And I think especially after the way we lost against Wolves and kind of not just the fact that we lost, but the manner in which we played, it leaves kind of that sour taste in your mouth and you just want to get back as soon as possible and sort of just put it right. So we've had a couple of weeks to live with it and hopefully we can sort of put it right tomorrow.
Yeah. It's been like really negative on like Twitter and stuff like that for the last couple of weeks. So really, we just need a win just to get our like mood up. And back to where we were like a month ago or so. We are previewing the Crystal Palace game today. Do you think we'll have the upper hand with obviously Gay, Elise, Doucouré out? Obviously, they're integral players to Palace. Eze's coming back, but he won't be fully fit, I imagine. So it could be a massive plus for us. What do you think? How do you think they'll come out and play? Because obviously Palace are a bit of an unknown entity as well with Glasner coming in. He's only had about just over a week, and it was hard to go off how they're going to play against Burnley. And what I watched of Match of the Day and stuff like that, it looked like Burnley were playing with high energy, and they overloaded the box a lot when they got forward. But do you reckon they'll play like that against Spurs? Do you reckon they'll be a bit more pragmatic?
Yeah, I think they probably will be more pragmatic because we saw against obviously Glasner wasn't in charge, but he effectively took charge from the stands against Everton. He kind of set the team up in the way that he wanted to, and going away from home to Goodison Park, it was a big game for them. They needed to get something, and they ended up with a draw. And they were a bit more pragmatic in that game, going away from home, especially with what was on the line. Whereas against Burnley, they were that more free flowing kind of outfit. Like they play 3 at the back, 5 at the back. And we'll get on to sort of talking about that in a minute. But in terms of the team news, I think that will probably dictate how they end up playing as well, because we haven't seen them with, obviously, Eze or Elise yet, who are their main attacking outfits. And Eze is going to be back, potentially, even if it's from the bench. So we might see a little bit more of a free-flowing Palace, not necessarily in the way that they set up, but because they've got those flair players on the pitch, or one of them in Eze, and potentially França as well, who got a bit of a chance last week. We might see something slightly different. But Mark Gay is a massive miss for them. They've been playing with sort of a strange back three of Joel Ward, Joachim Andersen, and Chris Richards.
Yeah.
So again, like not having Gahey for them is a massive boost for us, and I think that could potentially give us the upper hand. But obviously, when you counteract that with the players that we've potentially got missing, it's not great. And it's we saw how much we struggled without Porro and a doggy last week, and it's huge to have a doggy back. For sure, but Porro is a massive miss, and potentially Richarlison as well. I was saying on another pod earlier, like how funny is it how investigative Spurs Twitter goes when we've got an injury, and it's just like, oh, actually, if you look at YouTube and we put up this training clip, and you can see that Richarlison isn't on the screen when they've got all the players, but he's out there going to training, and it's actually filmed on Tuesday and all that kind of stuff. So that was a very entertaining little bit of discourse yesterday on Twitter. But Richarlison, I mean, we'll probably get onto how we set up a bit later, but I think Richarlison, although he's not played that well in the last couple of games, he's sort of gone off the boil in comparison to the highs and the levels that he's showed in the last couple of months. I thought against Brighton and Wolves, he didn't quite have that same balance. He sort of kept slipping over, didn't look quite as composed, passing it out of play. His link-up play wasn't as great, didn't look as threatening. But I do think with the way Palace might set up in terms of sitting in that lower block compared to what they did against Burnley, I do think we're probably going to miss that kind of that presence in the box with Richarlison. And Sonny's been amazing through the middle, but it's not ideally the game, I don't think, and I might be wrong, Spurs want to go into with playing Son through the middle and missing Richarlison. But what do you think, mate? Do you think...
Well, I think if Palace do play pragmatic, like you're saying, if they play with that low block, then Richarlison's going to be a massive miss. Son don't have that presence in the box. So actually, what we'll need is an early goal. And I know that goes without saying, but we do need an early goal. We need to make this game as end-to-end as possible. We need it to be a transitional game. Because then you got lots of Son, Werner, Brennan Johnson on their bike, getting in behind. And then that's how it will play into our hands. But the longer it goes on, I can see it being a bit like Wolves, or a bit like if they're playing a low block, because that's the way to beat Spurs at the moment. Just frustrate them, frustrate the home fans.
Yeah.
And then get something on the counter attack. And players like Eze, players like Ayew, they're definitely capable of doing that. So I think it will be a really tough game, especially if I think Richarlison is really needed. Like you say, he didn't have the best last couple of games, but his presence in the box, his movement is so good, and that's needed. That's what Son. I mean, Son has it, but just not to the same extent.
Yeah.
So I do think it will actually be a much harder game than people are saying. I think people are expecting Glasgow to play like all out attack, but that would just play into our hands. That doesn't make any sense. So it will be tough. It will be tough without Richarlison. That's a big miss. And like you were saying about the Spurs fans investigating it, they beat the media to it. So funny.
I know. Well, it's like we haven't played for a couple of weeks. There's been like sort of tumbleweeds around Tottenham, isn't there? There's been no press conference because we've had no game.
Yeah.
So there's been no official sort of communication, and I'm pretty sure the press conference is probably going on as we speak. So we might find out during recording this whether they are out. I know they sort of tend to do it around lunchtime, so we might find out a little bit more, and obviously that kind of changes how we look at things. But if we're going on the fact that they are both out, they are both huge misses. I think the right back situation is very interesting as well without Porro. Yeah. So I think there's been some sort of pretty rogue shouts for that, like as you sort of alluded to. I think I don't know. I think it will probably end up being Emerson Royale, but I don't know who would you go for in right back tomorrow.
Well, obviously a doggie's like a massive plus. Having a doggy back, we can still. I mean, he's so integral. Him and Porro are so integral to the way we play. So having one back's just obviously such a great, massive plus. I just don't know if Emerson. I love Emerson to bits. He's such a good personality. You can't hate him. No. Even when he can be frustrating on the pitch, he's just such a likeable person, such a likeable guy and character. And you can see how important he is, to the team in the dressing room. But in that inverted right back role, I don't think he has the attacking mindset. He doesn't have that football brain. He's a quality defender.
Yeah,
he just hasn't got that because to play the inverted role in a Postecoglou system, you got to be almost like a number 10.
Yeah.
But I've seen talk on Twitter of maybe Romero playing right back, Dragusin. I don't think that would work again because I don't think they have that attacking instinct. I've got a rogue shout that I don't think has been touted about, and I think it's Pat Matassar as an inverted fullback, because he does when he's playing in the 8 role. Obviously, he's a box to box. He can tackle, he can intercept. So I don't think we'd have worries about him on one-on-one defending. He drifts wide a lot, but also he makes those. He has that instinct to make those inverted darts into the box. I mean, you saw it for the goal against Brighton. Just getting into that's almost where Porro normally is, making that inverted run into the box, playing almost like a 10 in that position. So he definitely could do it. He also covers ground so easily. He eats up the grass, and I don't think he'll struggle in that transition of getting forward, getting back. The only question is whether he can hold a line, hold that back four, hold the offside trap, defending at the back post. Obviously, he hasn't been trained, but I just feel like we need to try something different against Palace, because against Wolves it didn't work with Emerson. It just didn't work. He's a decent player. It's just I do think, and also you see centre mids transition to invert fullbacks all the time. I don't think it's as hard as it sounds, but I don't think he'll do it. But that's something I just love to see.
I like it, to be fair. I do quite like it. I think it's one of those things where one of my main frustrations after the Wolves game was it seemed to be that Emerson and Sarr were sort of. It wasn't Sarr's fault because Sarr was just playing his natural game, but Emerson was also getting in his way at times, and they didn't quite have that same telepathic understanding, like you alluded to with Porro, making those darts to open up the space. And I think, like you touched on it, the goal against Brighton for Sarr was a perfect example of that. Was a perfect example, especially when you've got someone with the quality of Kulusevski on that right-hand side, who, when the space does open up, he can really flourish and play that ball through the lines. And you've got two players almost who, in Sarr and Porro, who really have that understanding and are able to sort of interchange. One of them might make the run, or they both sort of go and it really opens it up.
Yeah.
Or Porro dragging the defender away allows Sarr to burst through. And also, I think the thing with Sarr is, like you said as well, he does know how to sort of drop back and cover those positions. They do it all the time because of the fact that Porro and the doggy on those sides are, like you said, kind of taking up positions so unorthodox in terms of playing in the 10 for a lot of it, on the ball and off the ball. And I think that's actually something Ben Davies did a lot better against Wolves than Emerson. Emerson just, I think, his quality on the ball was exposed a lot. He just sort of takes a little bit too much time over it. He's not as aggressive as Porro in the sense that he wants to. He's head up and he wants to either drive with it or he's looking for that pass. And everything that Porro does is with purpose. Whereas Emerson, I think, just it's almost in his nature to sort of just be a bit too relaxed. And I think that's not what you need when that position is so intense. And I think this is part of why Spurs need to look at reinvesting in those positions for backup players in the summer, because the demand on Porro and Udogie is huge. I think Porro's covered more distance than anybody in the team. Obviously, we were building up to this point where it felt like they were both going to be out injured at the same time. We've been quite lucky in that aspect. Obviously, we've now got Udogie back, and we only missed one game with both of them, but they're so integral. So I do like the Sarr shout. I do really like it. The only thing I would say is that I think then you lose a little bit with Sarr in midfield, but I also think it's an opportunity for Spurs to then see what a midfield of Basuma, Bentancur and Maddison could look like. Yeah. Because that's another option. On the Romero thing, I actually don't mind it, especially in this sort of game. I think if it was a far more open game, then I think, like you said, Romero's not kind of got the same attacking instinct as Porro or Udogie comparatively on the other side. But I do think in a game where Palace might sit back a little bit, he's very composed on the ball. If you think of like what John Stones does for Man City, he's sort of able to roam around. And I do think Romero's got that in him. And I think with the way that, especially against teams that like to sit in, Romero's playing on the halfway line for a lot of it anyway. He's so composed on the ball. So I wouldn't mind it too much. It gives an opportunity for drag us in, but I do think it will probably end up being Emerson Royale. But I do like the Sarr shout. I do.
I do think it will be Emerson, yeah. And I can see the Romero shout because he pops up everywhere across the pitch. And it will go on these like maverick runs like now and again, like it will just start darting forward. So he has probably got that in him. I just think if Palace do play a low block, you just need that creative pass. That I mean, obviously Porro has that. Porro's so creative; he's one of our most creative players. And it's such a downgrade when you bring Emerson in. I feel like Sarr is. I mean, obviously he's nowhere near as creative as Porro, but he has got that creative pass forward. And actually, so does Romero, I guess. Like he has got that pass over the top. I just don't know if Emerson's got that in his locker to do it. But I do think he'll go for Emerson because it's the safest option. It's just he just can be quite frustrating. On the lineup then.
Sorry, I was just going to say, hopefully it's only for one more game as well. So I think he might take that into account and say, well, I think there's another interesting point to kind of talk about. I saw Lily White Lab did some good stuff about the fact that do we actually need to play with inverted fullbacks every single week? And could you maybe potentially allow Emerson to just sort of do his more traditional fullback duties and allow almost Sarr to be that far more? You don't have to rely on them constantly interchanging. I think the onus should maybe be more on whoever plays in that 8 on that side and the winger to maybe sort of take that creative onus and allow Udogie to do what he does. But then it's a risk of feeling unbalanced. If you play them both as more traditional fullbacks, it's a strange one. I think it's something Postecoglou needs to figure out if we're going to be without both of them in the future for periods. So it's an interesting one. But I think as you were about to allude to, I think there's also some kind of attacking selections or the selection in attack that we sort of need to figure out as well for Saturday because it feels a little bit disjointed at the moment, I think.
Yeah, it does. Quickly on the fullbacks again. Obviously when we go out in the market and try and sign backups, I feel like there's such a hard signing to make because they've got to be able to do their bit in attacking situations, in creative situations, almost like a number 10. And they've got to be a solid defender as well. I feel like that's such a hard player to find at the moment. I think we're so lucky with Udogie and Porro, and then Emerson and Davis have just proved how difficult the job actually is. So if we're going to be smart and we're going to sign players, like maybe look for bargains like we did with Udogie, etc., it's going to be really, really difficult to get those players. They're such important players for us, and if there's other competitions next season, we can't rely on Emerson or Davis, I don't think, because it's just a weakness.
I agree. I think it's as well. I sort of talked about this in a video that I did, in the sense that in terms of transfer targets for the summer, we did a whole episode of the lab on the Fighting Cock, sort of talking about who do we target, and there's been a lot of discussion around that. And again, we'll sort of get onto that with the attacking positions as well, because I think people are very much in the mind of prioritising a winger or that sort of attacking midfielder like Neto or Eze. But in terms of the fullbacks, I don't necessarily like the inverted fullback role. It's not a position. That position doesn't exist. I think it's just about, like, you got to remember as well, like Porro and Udogie were bought as wing backs, and it's just that they're both so technically secure and comfortable on the ball, and their defending has improved, or Porro's defending has certainly improved a lot.
Yeah, definitely
this season. Just because they are so technically secure, and Udogie is so physical, they've both got great engines that they're able to do that. So I think if you can just identify some players that kind of share those main traits in terms of their play style, I don't think it's as much about, like, it's hard to go out and buy an inverted fullback. I think it's just going out and buying someone that's like, who do we think we could mould into this sort of player based on their technical ability and how comfortable they are on the ball. So I think it's an interesting, I do think that'll be a massive topic of discussion for the summer for sure, as soon as the season finishes.
Yeah, it's vital. It's integral. If we're going to go forward, we need those backups. We need a proper squad. Players can interchange. So it will be definitely something to look forward to, like in the summer. Who do you think will play up front then? Because obviously, if Richarlison's out, Son, we're guessing, is going to go striker. There's not much other options there. And then we've got Werner, Brennan Johnson, Kulusevski to choose from. What would you do, and what do you think Ange will do?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I do think it'll probably be Son through the middle if Richarlison is out. And I think it will probably be, I've just seen actually on Twitter that Richarlison is apparently out for 3 to 4 weeks.
Really? Oh my God.
With a knee injury. I've just Alistair Gold's just broken that, so that's fun. So we will definitely be without him. So at least of what we said in the first sort of 20 minutes of the pod isn't completely irrelevant. So it will be Sonny through the middle. And I would personally go with Werner out wide. I think it's a tricky one because, out on the left, sorry. I think it's a tricky one because, again, if Palace sort of set up in this sort of mid to low block, there isn't going to be a hell of a lot of space, as we sort of saw in the Wolves game, for those wingers to get in behind. And I think that's why Sonny sort of was a little bit ineffective against Wolves, but he was also ineffective when he had the ball in terms of taking players on and trying to beat them, because there wasn't a lot of space to sort of dart into. But when we'd sort of be relying on Palace to try and come on to us to exploit that space, and they do play with a 5 at the back. And although last week those 2 wing backs for Palace did really bomb on because they were at home and they were playing against 10 men, they took the initiative against Burnley. I don't think we'll see as much of that against Tottenham tomorrow.
It'd be stupid if they did that.
Exactly, and we didn't really see it against Everton a few weeks ago either, because like you said, it would be naive in the sense that they know that Spurs thrive on having space in behind, and we've seen that in games where we've killed teams this season. With Newcastle at home was an example where they almost came onto us a bit too much. And also, Sonny was great in that game in terms of squaring Trippier up 1v1. So we're going to need a lot more of that tomorrow from Sonny against a fullback. I think it's in Munoz for Palace, who they signed in January, who's inexperienced to the league. And Sonny is kind of, I suppose, obviously, he won't be playing out there, but it's him or Werner will be both drifting into those pockets. It's interesting because we saw Werner when he came on against Wolves. He started through the middle, then drifted out wide, then sort of started back through the middle again. Maybe that's something that Ange might do tomorrow and sort of try and make it as fluid as possible to prevent them from tracking the runners.
Them interchanging,
but I do think it will probably be Werner out wide. I'm not sure how much I like Johnson out on the left, so I think it will probably be Werner. And I think we need to see. We know that Johnson is going to be a player for the future, but I think with Werner, we need to know if we're going to pick up that deal in the summer. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for him tomorrow to go and test himself against a team that's not necessarily going to play to his strengths. Werner loves running in behind, timing his runs, and that's what his game is built on. We know it's not necessarily built on his finishing. So that's where he kind of thrives. So that's what I think he'll do. And on the other side, I still think it'll be Kulusevski. I just think that, again, for exactly the same argument, I don't think there's going to be a hell of a lot of space. And Johnson isn't that sort of winger that's going to take players on 1v1. No, we've seen that. He thrives on the space and able to time his run. And he's excellent at that. He is really, really good at that. but I don't think there's going to be the space in behind for him to do that. So I do think it'll be Kulusevski, and we'll try and have to play through them. So what do you think, mate? Do you think the same, or do you think he'll go with Johnson?
Well, I think I agree with you absolutely, like 100%. Because I think Johnson, he's best when he's on the end of a finished product sort of thing. Like he's on the end of a move. And I don't think he's someone that's comfortable running out defence, running out low block. I don't think that's his gameplay. Like I just don't think he suits that system.
I agree.
I think he's someone that you need when the game's stretched to be getting into the box, like he did against Palace, like he did against Brentford. As soon as that game gets stretched, he's on his bike. He's right on the end of that move. And Werner is he is much better at getting the ball and running and trying making things happen. He's very much based on instinct, Werner. So I do think we'll have to play Werner on the left, Kulusevski on the right, and then Son up front. It will be interesting to see Son, especially now we know Richarlison's going to be out for 3 to 4 weeks. It will be interesting to see Son striker again, because I don't think he was cutting it out on the left wing. He's not that 1v1 specialist anymore. At least he's not. That's not his game. His game's molded into much more almost of a 9. And it's almost like a blessing in disguise. I don't want to say that, because Richarlison you're gutted for him, because he's really like started to get his form back. He's banging in the goals. His link up plays much better. His hold up plays much better. But I do think we're strongest when Son is up front. I shouldn't say blessing in disguise, because that's awful. But
I get what you mean, though. I do kind of get what you mean. I sort of was thinking something similar, and said something similar earlier, in the sense that, like, we were talking about it on the preview for the Fighting Cock, and it's like, I do think that it's almost, I think I actually did use the same words, but this was prior to us knowing that he was going to be out for that amount of time. So just thought
exactly.
that maybe it's one game and it's a good opportunity to sort of say, look, it hasn't been your game the last couple, let's try something different, and then let's bring you off the bench if you're fit enough and you're hungry, and you can get back up to that level. So I get what you mean, and I do think, especially with the games that we've got coming up as well, Villa away is going to be a far more transitional game. They're going to want to come onto us. I just think I do worry with Sonny sometimes that he's not that box present striker that Richarlison is, and I think if you go back to the Wolves game, although Richarlison wasn't playing well and it wasn't happening for him, things were bouncing off him. Like I said, the link-up play from him has improved so much. And that was a kind of a facet in his game that has sort of disappeared again in the last couple of weeks, and it's just not happened for him. But I do think against Wolves, I think Postecoglou was probably wrong to take him off, because if you think, and again, this is all hypothetical, but if you think of that chance that fell to Ben Davies at the end of the game, Richarlison, being that box-present striker, sniffs out that opportunity, and 9 times out of 10, from what I've seen with his heading ability, he probably scores that. And I think we sort of lost that, and I wasn't really sure what Postecoglou was trying to do. I think this is also where we missed someone like Veliz, because I was... I 100% back the loan. Like, I think it's definitely the right thing to do. Obviously, hindsight is a powerful thing when Richarlison turns out he's out for a month. But I do think for next season, it's something to look to, in the sense that Veliz obviously scored a goal against Brighton. I don't want to spend too much time on it because he's not actually here. But you know what I mean? Is that striker that you feel like can come on and be a bit of a nuisance? And I think we're going to miss that on Saturday. So that's a big blow for us, a really big blow.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't anticipating Richarlison getting injured. We sort of thought we'd rode that wave with the Asian Cup. Son's now back.
We thought we'd fixed him.
yeah, literally. And Veliz was that sort of player that come in. He's chaotic in the box. But obviously, the loan's like perfect for him. But now we're in a situation where who's going to be up front if Son gets injured? Werner, Johnson. We have that problem where there isn't a aerial presence. There isn't a fox in the box sort of thing for games against, say, if Palace have a low block, for those low block teams. But I do think. I think it will benefit Maddison having Son ahead of him. I really do. I think Maddison come back from his injury. Obviously, he's been excellent, but he hasn't been at the same performance levels as he was before his injury. I know that's normal. He's probably getting back to fitness, but I do think having Son ahead of him, where he can link up with Son as he did earlier this season, I do think it will benefit him. I think he'll be performing better. He had a better understanding with Son than he has with Richarlison. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing them two link up again. I know it'll be difficult against the low block, but I am looking forward to seeing how they shape up with each other again. Because we've missed that. We have missed that. There's definitely been a dynamic to our attack that we have missed, with Son being out on out wide and Richarlison being up front. we were so much more effective when we had Son up front, Maddison just behind him, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think you think back to what made us so successful at the start of the season. And this was one of the reasons why in the first few months, I was actually giving Richarlison a lot of praise because I think he actually was quite effective out wide before he moved through the middle, just in the sense that he worked really hard and linked up the play really nicely and allowed Sonny to do what he is best at and be on the end of chances to finishes. It just, that team, that sort of structure with Richie out wide and Sonny through the middle and Kulusevski on the right just felt a little bit more balanced and geared towards the fact that we've got the most clinical striker in world football, not just this season, but over the course of the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. And I think that's an interesting point that I think we have lost something in that Maddison-Son connection. Obviously, they haven't played together prior to, obviously, Wolves was Sonny's first start back. Maddison, like you said, I think after the injury, it's going to take him a minute to get back up to speed. And hopefully we'll see that, especially after a couple of weeks off. Hopefully we'll see a sort of fully fit firing Maddison. And against a low block, again, he's going to be key to unlocking that door. I think that can almost take some of the pressure off Son in a way, because like we said, I'm not sure Son is necessarily set up to play against these kind of low block, physical defender, three at the back kind of teams. But I do think that having Maddison back in that relationship is almost telepathic. And I think if you think back to like the Fulham game, for example, and there's that iconic sort of shot of them doing the celebration together. I think a lot of football is about that sort of feeling. And we were riding that wave at the start of the season. Everything felt so positive. It was them two at the centre of it, Maddison coming in as this new talisman and them firing together. And that was almost a little bit of that was sort of an image that defined our season in a way, because they were the two players that were making us so effective going forward. So I think you're right. I think there is, despite Richarlison being out and despite the concerns that I do have with Son playing through the middle against those low blocks, I do think there is reason to be positive in the sense that hopefully we'll see that relationship thrive again with them two, with Son and Maddison. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that.
Has it been since Chelsea that they haven't played together?
Must have been. Obviously, the Wolves game would have been the first game they started together since Chelsea. I literally, every time I put, in the last couple of weeks when we've been getting towards like, we could have everybody back. And every time on a Friday, I'll do a TikTok previewing the game. It's like, finally, we could see this. And I always put the like team sheet from Chelsea or from the Liverpool game at home when it was Richie, Son and Kulu. It's like, maybe this week we'll see it. Maybe this week. And I see it on Twitter all the time as well. It's like, and you get to the game, the day of the game or the day before the game, it's like, Richardson's out for 3 or 4 weeks and Porro's out. It's like, for fuck's sake. Come on.
Yeah. I was talking about Maddison. I was going to ask this further along, but who do you think will be our most important player in this game with the style of play that you think Palace will play? Who do you think will be our most important player when it comes to breaking through the low block?
I think Maddison's got to run it, isn't he? I do think he does. I think that Palace midfield, obviously, they've lost Chet Decore for the rest of the season, which is a huge blow for them. And I think something that Palace fans feel that isn't necessarily being talked enough. And I know talked about enough, and I know that Palace fans have felt this frustration of their kind of perception in the wider media, and that we kind of they look at us and think, well, why are you not happy? You've been in the Premier League for X amount of time. And I think this sort of plays into that. Decore is a massive miss for them.
Yeah,
but I think bringing in Jefferson Lerma on a free was a really good bit of business. Adam Wharton in the January window as well was a player that we were linked with as a young sort of midfielder solution to look forward to the future. He looks really, really good. So I think Maddison, as the experienced player, is going to have to try and win that battle. It's going to be interesting because they've got two midfielders there that can really sort of cover the ground. So I think we're going to try and have to overload them there, which is arguably a reason to persist with this inverted fullback system, because you want to create those overloads and pull apart the midfield and create this space for Maddison to do his thing, which we saw against Brighton. And Maddison didn't quite play at his best, but there was a few opportunities that he really had where if the pass was slightly better or the shot was slightly better, it could have been a different game. But it was just that his end product wasn't on the same level, but he was definitely picking up the same sort of spaces because we were able to overrun them. So maybe this is a game for setting up in that same way, but I do think it's Maddison that's got to be key, and I think Kulusevski as well. He's got to be that help to be the man that unlocks the door. I thought he was unlucky in that Brighton game, really, because I thought that I know this is sort of going back about 3 weeks or so now. I know he got substituted, but he had a massive hand in the goal and he was really starting to influence things in the second half. Yeah. And obviously he sort of grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck for 5-10 minutes against Wolves to get us back in the game last week. And I think he's a player that always sort of divides opinion, but I do think he's going to be key tomorrow as well, because he has got that quality to be able to feed it through to Sonny and Werner when the game does open up a little bit, because there will be a period in the game where it does open up tomorrow, whether Spurs get an early goal, like you said, is going to be so crucial. And then they have to put the foot down and take the chances and, not let their foot off Palace's throat, so to speak. So I think it's going to be the creative players that are going to be key. But also we've got to make sure, just generally, we win that midfield battle, because I do think that's quite a nice balance for Palace, even with Decore out.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I think Maddison's going to be integral to this game. whatever type of game it is. If it's a low block that we're trying to score against, he's going to be pulling the strings, being that creator, trying to break that defense down. But if the game's open, he's going to be pulling the strings, setting Werner off on his bike, Son on his bike,
Absolutely, yeah.
linking up Kulusevski. He is going to be the most important player in this game, I think.
Yeah.
Just because, especially because we haven't got Porro as well. Porro, Kulusevski, Maddison, they're our main creators. We're missing Porro, so we're going to have to rely on Maddison, Kulusevski a bit more. And like I said, I do think he'll play a bit better with Son ahead of him. I do think that will feel him a bit more confidence. They'll have that, telepathic, like link up. And I can see him really running the show. It will be really tough. Wharton is a great player.
Yeah.
Lerma, he looked quality against Burnley. I know Burnley were a bit of like, I mean, they're down to 10 men. But he's the one that got, I can't remember who got sent off, but he's the one
Josh,
that got,
Josh Brownhill, yeah.
Yeah. He's the one that got the sending off. He pushed high. He was very energetic.
Exactly.
And it will be a tough battle in the midfield. But I do think Maddison, he's that player to overcome that midfield and to win us the game. I can't see us winning a game if we're playing a low block without Maddison, especially if we've not got Porro. So I do think he'll be the most important player. Off the back of the defeat to Wolves, how crucial is this game? Is this 3 points in relation to the Champions League? Because obviously there was such a negative reaction to the Wolves game, which is understandable. But in the big picture, we knew we were going to have all these types of defeats throughout the season.
Yeah.
But do you think there is pressure on Ange to deliver us Champions League now? Because, go on. What's your thoughts?
I don't think there's pressure on him to deliver Champions League football. I think there might be from some aspects of the fan base. I know I don't really necessarily sit in that camp as much, but I think from the outside, bearing in mind where we were, that's naturally going to create that story of like, well, you were top and 5 points clear at one point in the season, and now you're saying, oh, well, we'll probably just qualify for the Europa League.
Yeah.
But it is a massive game tomorrow. Not just for that, to get, to help us on that path to potentially deliver Champions League football, especially with Villa next week. That then becomes a massive game, because if we beat Palace, then beat Villa, and we've got a game in hand, we can go back above them potentially next weekend.
Yeah.
I think if we win, it depends obviously how Villa get on this weekend, but there's a chance where that could happen and everything sort of feels rosy in the garden again, especially going into a really tough run in April. But I think it's, to me, the pressure tomorrow more comes about the feeling around what's going on, because like you said, the negative reaction to Wolves was noticeable. And I did my sort of post-match review and I was pretty negative. It was the first time I'd been that negative really this season. It was the first sort of time I'd walked away from the ground thinking, I didn't really understand that. I don't really understand what you were trying to do. It sort of left me very frustrated. And there wasn't anything to cling on to from that performance. Whereas if you think back to the start of the season, the defeats to Aston Villa at home, even the defeat to Chelsea at home, there was things you could take away from that and feel really, really positive about.
Yeah, we had a go.
We had a go, exactly. And fans, sort of rival fans, which you should just try and block out as much as possible anyway.
Yeah.
Sort of gave us that, sort of were thinking that we were deluded for that. But actually, again, I sort of come back to what I said about how Palace fans are feeling and how they want to feel about their club. It's just you want something to get behind, and we've seen that with Ange. So, yes, last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, there wasn't really that, but that's so short term. And I think like you sort of nailed it in the sense that we were told by Celtic fans and by fans that had previously had Ange as their manager that he struggles at the start. He'll struggle to get up to speed with things. It'll take him a while to implement what he's doing. And then we catch fire straight away from pre-season. We were like, like this team, we looked like we could really go somewhere. And then in the first few performances of the season, we had that massive moment against United, which really felt like that Postecoglou era had started. Even with the draw in the opening day against Brentford, there were so many positive things you could take about that. Then we went on that run, not losing 10 games, and we were 5 points clear at the top, even if it was just for a day or so. And everything felt amazing. And even everything since then has felt great. But the Wolves game was sort of a bit of a buffer to that, and maybe a bit of a reality check, but also a good reminder that this is a long-term project and we're on the right path with Postecoglou. You're just going to have these little hiccups and bumps in the road. So hopefully we can put it right tomorrow. And I think tomorrow is more to me about putting it right and getting back on track with that feeling rather than, oh God, we've got to make sure we qualify for the Champions League. Because I've alluded to it quite a few times, and I actually think that the Europa League wouldn't be a bad thing for Spurs next season anyway. And especially when you consider what expectations were at the start of the season. And although expectations change, I don't necessarily think it would be a bad thing.
Yeah, talk to me about why why Europa League would be important for us. Why you prefer Europa League? Would you prefer Europa League over Champions League? Is that what you're saying, or are you just
I,
saying it's not
I think
necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, I think Flav has created this narrative that I said that I would much rather be in the
Yeah,
Europa League than the Champions League, and he's sort of thrown me under the bus.
yeah, yeah,
But to sort of, I guess where I'm coming from is that I think the Europa League. I'd love to be back in the Champions League. We've had so many special Champions League nights at White Hart Lane and at the new ground, and it's an
yeah,
opportunity, and it's also stamping a mark on the rest of the league, saying this is what Postecoglou has been able to do in his first season. You should be
yeah,
worried about what we can achieve if we get more backing in the summer. Like, financial fair play looks incredibly good for us. The summer presents a really good opportunity to kick on. So that would be amazing. It would be an amazing thing and an amazing achievement for Postecoglou. But I think obviously me and you both listened to Jaff, and James kind of made a really good point yesterday about Newcastle, and it's almost like the Champions League came too soon for them. They sort of needed that. I think they needed that Europa League to sort of. I don't know.
yeah,
Obviously, it's easy to say in hindsight, and they got shafted with a very difficult group. To be fair to them, and again, they could easily have got through into Europa League or the Champions League if certain decisions hadn't gone their way and stuff, and everything looked amazing for them at the start, battering PSG. But I think as the way their season's panned out, it's easy to create that narrative. But I do think he was right. And I think that it would, especially with, I made a TikTok about it yesterday, sort of talking about, and there's been a lot of narrative around Tottenham's youth players off the back of what Liverpool have done in the last week or so and how amazing that they've been and how amazing Klopp has been to sort of give them that opportunity. And I think if you think about Harry Kane, right, Harry Kane was made in the Europa League.
yeah,
When Pochettino came in, we had Soldado and Adebayor, and everyone was sort of saying, Kane, come on, let's give Kane a chance because, as much as we don't like to admit it, and as much as he loves to dine out on it, Tim Sherwood gave him that chance to the back end of the season before, and he had Premier League exposure and scored 3 goals in 3 games, I think it was, towards the end of that season. But it was really in the Europa League where Kane sort of grew up and was formed and was banging in goals and even going in goal. And it was just that sense that he was going to be this guy. There's something about him. And I do think being in the Europa League with the amount of talent that we've got coming through that could benefit from playing regular first team football and also, the Europa League is incredibly demanding. So that's one of the negatives to being in it, but also it gives you an opportunity to give those players chances. So I'd love to be in the Champions League. If you said to me, would you rather be in the Champions League or Europa League? I'd say Champions League every day. But I do think if we were to finish 5th, and again, who knows, the 5th could still be the Champions League. The scales have sort of tipped towards it coming back that way now, whereas in a couple of weeks ago when the first round of Champions League games happened, it looked as if it was going to go to Germany or go to Italy, whereas now that has changed again. So we'll see. I think if we finish 5th and wherever that takes us, I will be happy with that. But also,
yeah.
A little bit frustrated about what we could have gone on to achieve. But again, it's about remembering the big picture, I think, which is so important for us.
Yeah, I think Europa League would be best in terms of a healthy trajectory.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's been a lot of talk about with obviously Liverpool winning the League Cup and bringing on all those youngsters. And there's been a lot of talk within the fan base about why haven't we seen as many youngsters come into the first team? But I think that's really tough in a first season for Postecoglou because he's still figuring out his own his actual starting 11. So Europa League is a great chance to then start integrating those youngsters into the squad, giving them first team minutes, and that's something we can all get excited about. It's also a much better competition than it was when we were last in Europa League. The level of opposition is ridiculous. You've got some giants, European giants in that league consistently, and we have done for the last few years. So I don't think it's something to be scoffed at. The only thing is that it's the Champions League, the finances that come with finishing in the Champions League spot can really help us really have that push in terms of recruitment, because obviously players joining are going to want to play Champions League, although that's not really the case because we still had a really good window in the summer without any European 100%. Football. But I just think when you want to make that final push, make those signings like Pedro Neto, Eze potentially, I just think they're going to cost a lot of money, and I'm not Levy out, but he has to redeem himself for the last couple of years, but it does give him that excuse to not then spend the money that we need to bring those types of players in to then elevate us to the next level and compete with the Cities, the Liverpools, and the Arsenals. So I think Champions League from a financial perspective is so crucial. But if you're we'd be ahead of our project if we did get Champions League.
Yeah.
So I don't think there should be a massive disappointment if we make the Europa League, because that is, we're on the incline.
Yeah.
and Europa League is that next step.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there, because I think it's just about, again, it's about acknowledging that you're on the right path. And I think it's just about managing expectations. Like, we'd all be buzzing collectively as a fan base if we got into the Champions League, and we wouldn't even be thinking about the fact that, is this coming too soon, etc., etc., because you want to be in those big games, playing against the big teams, big players. Like you said, allows us to go to another level financially, allows us to sort of unlock this level of players. But like you said, our recruitment was very good in the summer last year, even without any European football. So that, whether that's 100% true or not is another debate. But I think you're completely right in the sense that if we were to qualify for the Europa League, I think people just need to remind themselves of people shouldn't be too disappointed, essentially, is what it is, rather than getting it in the Champions League and it's like, oh God, we have to check ourselves. Are we getting ahead of ourselves? Because as fans, you should be allowed to enjoy that. So that I think you're completely right.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the season, fans on social media, fans on it, like in the media, were saying they'd be happy with sixth place if we played good football. And that's what Postecoglou's brought. He's brought good football, but also we're in a position to get potentially Champions League. So we have overachieved, if you think of the big picture. It's just, we know we are capable of getting Champions League, so there would be a little bit of disappointment surrounding a fifth place finish, sixth place finish. But that was the expectation. You're thinking about the first season under Postecoglou. So I don't think it would be the end of the world. But this is a big project. This is a long-term project. You get seeing the players that we're bringing through. They're nowhere near their prime. So Europa League would be such a good experience for them as well to build up to that top stage. And on Eze then, because obviously he plays for Palace and he's going to cause us problems tomorrow. We all know that because he's such a good player. Obviously, you're talking about him on your TikTok. And we've been linked with him over the last few days. I think it was Miguel Delaney linking us with him or Pedro Neto. We put a poll up on our Twitter, Daring and Doing Pod, and I think Pedro Neto come out on top. I'm pretty sure. But if Eze did join, where do you think he would play? How do you think he'd suit the system? And also, do you think it's realistic?
I think it's definitely realistic. I think it's a bit like the Neto situation where we've probably just got to worry about the other teams that might be circling around him as well, because they are two incredibly talented players. And I think City obviously will link with Eze. I'd imagine that City will probably be linked with Neto in the summer as well. And Liverpool potentially will be as well, because I think I saw someone post it either on Twitter or on TikTok, I can't remember, saying essentially that a team like City, because of how they've sort of built their team over the years, they're probably only looking to sign one big player in the summer. And they don't for all the money that they've got, they don't tend to go massive. City really, They kind of like, right, well, let's just add this player, let's just add this, and Neto could be an example of them doing that. So again, I think it's just being aware about who is around us, but I also think for someone like Eze, I think Tottenham is a great step up in his career. And I love Eberechi Eze. I would probably say he's my favourite player in the Premier League outside of Tottenham. And to watch, I think he's just got something that not many other players have. And there's been this massive debate around, like, are footballers becoming too, or sort of has that maverick come out of football? Like, players are more athletes nowadays, whereas you don't see kind of the Ronaldinho types. Neymar was a bit of an outlier when he sort of came through, and we don't really see those kind of players that much anymore. And that's why Eze, and I sort of said it in the video that I made on TikTok, comparing Elise and Eze, and I think Elise is amazing, but I've always tended to prefer Eze just because I love players like that who play with a smile on their face. Elise is more of that killer. He's kind of got that, like, I'm not taking any mercy. He's got that sort of stone cold look about him, and I love that. That's amazing. But Eze is just a joy to watch, and like you said, he's going to cause us problems tomorrow. In terms of, I guess, I would be very much happy with either of them. I think there were some people in my comments saying, "Oh, why don't we sign both?" And it was like, well, I don't really see how. Even if Spurs could afford to, I just don't think that makes sense.
Can't see us doing it.
Yeah, it's not career mode. Like, I get what people mean. It's like, but I'd love to, but unfortunately that just won't happen. But I think Neto is probably the better fit. But I think Eze, you can just see it, can't you? Like, you can just see him fitting in at Spurs.
He's so Spurs, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
He's so Spurs. He epitomises what it is to play as an attacker for Tottenham. He's got the flair, he's got the entertainment, he's got the smile, like you were saying in your TikTok. And also it's realistic as well because he's part of that CAA-based agency that's in bed with Tottenham, in bed with Daniel Levy. So I definitely can see it. And if he does go to City, then we can just take Jack Grealish. So it's a bit of a win-win.
Exactly.
But
he's another one though, that just feels like Spurs, like Grealish and Eze sort of have that. And other fans will sort of say, "Well, what are you talking about? You don't understand what you mean." But I think Tottenham fans get it. There's that sort
100%.
of when you think of the sort of maverick kind of players that we've had down the years, they've all been that attack. Spurs have had amazing attackers, and actually Kane doesn't even really fit into that. Kane,
no, he doesn't. No.
Is the best sort of like, he's just an out and out goal scorer, incredible footballer, but he doesn't have that same thing that like a Bale had, a Gascoigne had, a Hoddle had, a Waddle had. Like if you're going back to sort of our parents' generation,
Prime Ali.
Yeah, exactly. Dele Alli was the epitome of it as well. Just had that intangible quality that just made them Spurs. And I think Crystal Palace fans won't like to hear it. But I also think in a funny way that if Palace were to sell Eze, I actually think they'd probably this is going to sound crazy and Palace fans are probably like, what are you talking about? But I think if he was to go anywhere, I think they probably would quite like to see him go to Spurs because I think, again, they probably recognise that fit and are aware that he will probably end up leaving at some point. But
yeah,
I think in terms of where he'll fit, I think, like I said, Neto is probably that stylistic, that better fit for what we need in terms of our wingers. But I definitely could see him floating out on that left-hand side. He could, obviously, again, if we are in Europe, it allows you to rest Maddison. Potentially, if you want to go balls to the wall, play them together in the two number 8s. That would be something, that would be crazy. But I'd like to see it, or even in-game, adapt and sort of... We've seen he's done it with Kulusevski, where he's brought him inside and played him in that number 8 on the right. There's room to do it. And again, similar to Grealish, I could see Grealish operating in that same way if that was to happen. Although, as much as I'd love that, I think Eze is probably the more realistic one. But I'd love him. I just absolutely love Eberechi Eze.
Yeah. I know I'm biased, but I do think he'd suit Tottenham's system better than City. I feel like he'd just become like a cog in the machine at City.
Just another player.
Yeah, exactly. Almost like Grealish. Like you've seen his like freedom on the pitch where he thrives has been completely stripped of him, and I feel like Eze or Grealish, if Grealish comes Spurs, he's not linked, but if he does, like they'd have that freedom in like on the pitch to really shine, really thrive. So I feel like it would be the better move for Eze. But I if City come in for him, I can't see us competing really. But who would you prefer though? Really quick, who would you prefer, Grealish or Eze? Because you're a big fan of both.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I think Eze just makes the more sense in terms of the fact that he's a little bit younger. He's coming into his prime. He'll be 26 in the summer. And it's something that I've manifested for years since he was at QPR. I just remember seeing this kid thinking, like, this kid is special. And then we were linked with him before he went to Palace. And then Palace sort of ended up... It was a bit like... I mean, we've had loads of players like that. And I sort of said it in the video that I made about Grealish and touched on it when I talked about Eze. It happened with Maddison where we were going to sign him from Norwich and then it ended up happening, like it all sort of came full circle. We ended up signing him. Obviously, Grealish was basically a Spurs player, but we didn't want to pay the money. Could that then come full circle and he end up at Tottenham? And Eze would be the same sort of story. We were heavily linked with him and really wanted to buy him. And I do think that Eze would be, like I said, I think Neto is probably the more stylistic fit if you're comparing them two in terms of if you believe what you read in, I think it was The Independent or whoever Miguel Delaney writes for. Those were the two that are apparently top of the shopping list. So if you're comparing them two, I do think Neto probably is more what we need, but Eze I would love that. I would absolutely love it. Yeah,
it's so tempting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so tempting. What's your score predictions for tomorrow before we wrap up?
I mean, I think it could be a game with a lot of goals. It could be a tight one. I think from the outside, if you're a neutral, you're probably looking at Spurs Palace thinking there's something in that game. There's something a bit exciting given how we've been playing in there at the start of a new era. But I do think it might be that little bit tighter. I tend to always predict Spurs to win, especially this season, especially at home. You've got to. I'm not going to sit here and say I think we'll lose. Whereas last season, you were going into every game thinking that towards the end of the season. So we're in a much better place comparatively to there. So I think I'd go 2-0. I fancy us to keep 2-0 tomorrow. I'm going to go 2-0.
Okay.
What about yourself?
I don't know. It's just they're such an unknown entity, aren't they, Palace? And they always turn up against Spurs. I feel like Schlupp always scores against us.
Yeah.
Are you like it's you can just see them scoring a goal at least tomorrow, because I do think we are quite vulnerable when we're playing against the counter attack.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They've got that new manager bounce. They've got a real good buzz around the club. I just think Spurs need to win, and obviously we've had that 2-week break to sort of refine our game plan. I don't think we'll see any much different because again, I think they're quite hard to judge at the moment tactically. So, but I do think if we get that goal early, the game will open up and it'll play into our hands. And I can see us winning 3-1. I think 3-1.
Right, I thought that's what you were going to say. As you were alluding to that about it opening up, I thought you were going to say 3-1.
Yeah, I can see them probably scoring. I can't see us keeping a clean sheet, I don't think.
I'd like to see a game where we just feel a little bit more comfortable throughout. I love the excitement, but it's also just like you don't want to be sitting on the edge of the seat in a bad way the whole time thinking, oh, God, are we going to get done here on the counter-attack? But no, I feel positive about tomorrow. It's going to be a bit of, like you said, an unknown quantity is probably the best way to describe it, but I do feel positive.
Yeah. Nice, mate. Thank you so much for today. And what's your socials? Do you want to shout out your socials?
Of course, mate. No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to sort of get this going and get it out there.
Yeah, buzzing.
And sort of see where we can build it to. So yeah, nice one, mate. I appreciate it. So socials, Ben Talks Football on TikTok, Ben_Bowman_ on Twitter. I'm going to fight the person that has at Ben Bowman and try and see if I can get that off them, because trying to say like it's such a mouthful to try and get it across. But if you search Ben Bowman, you'll find me on there anyway.
Yeah.
And then make sure to go and follow us on Darren and Doing Pod on TikTok and everything else as well. So yeah, nice one, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, mate. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Nice one.
Take care.